Hello, Media Watchers, Hayden Donnell.
Hello, Emile.
What's the score in the cricket?
I'm just looking at it, 78 for 2. We got David Warner out.
That's good.
That's the main thing.
That is
In the cricket, I always say the main thing is that David Warner is not in, and that we ruin his retirement tour.
No, while triumph is good, the failure of your enemies is even better.
That's what you're living for.
Let's talk media stuff, Hayden, because it is Midweek Mediawatch. And, we should really probably start with the death of Efeso Collins. It was a big thing for media to respond to today.
Yeah, I don't want to go on with the rest of the show with this unremarked. I had a bit to do with Efeso through my reporting on local government. I think I reported when he announced his decision to stand for the Greens as well. And everyone who's met him, he was just a genuinely kind man. And that seems like an unremarkable thing. But it was remarkable the way that he was kind. And most people, especially politicians, are driven by some form of hostility. He seemed to be mainly motivated by a real palpable warmth.
Well, yeah, I mean, an observation that I've heard quite a bit today is, and that links in with what you're saying there, I think, is that a lot of people who work in politics professionally for an extended period of time probably get in with good intentions, but perhaps become somewhat corrupted by the institution of politics.
Well, I guess it's what we were talking about before with David Warner. It's vanquishing your enemies. And I don't think that he never gave that impression that he wanted to vanquish his enemies. Wayne Brown came out with a statement today saying they actually became good friends. I saw that when they're on the campaign trail. That's true. Wayne said that to me in private, it's not just a statement for the press. They really did become friends, and that's really testament to Efeso's warmth, because they are very different people. And I think the most of his warmth, though, was reserved for his family, who he would mention at any opportunity. Anyone who knows him would know that he did. If he could bring up his wife and his daughters in particular, he would. So that's one thing that was highlighted today. And I saw a clip from the former News Talk ZB reporter Aaron Darman really illustrated the best, I think. So this is that clip.
There's a letter here that Capiriella wrote to us on behalf of her and Asalemo, our daughters. And she said, "Dad, I'm proud of you." I never heard those words from my own father, because it's probably not a Samoan dad thing to do, knowing that my baby is proud of me is enough to keep going.
Yeah, he just loved them, and obviously they were his whole reason for doing what he did. It's such a tragedy.
If there is an element of media criticism around this story, it is, I suppose, that the news did come out pretty quickly. There was a bit of concern that Efeso's family had not been notified.
Or that they could have been notified through the media, because the reports were pretty quick. They quoted care workers at the scene that confirmed the death, and the reports noted that those care workers were visibly emotional. So they're possibly in shock and maybe not thinking through all the ramifications of them talking. It was a quick news gathering process, and from what we can understand, Collins' family were appropriately notified. They didn't learn of this through the media, but there's still the suspicion that they could have, or that if things had gone differently, that they could have. The former RNZ presenter Marnie Dunlop mentioned this, and she asked a question on Twitter. She said, "Editors, take a good look at processes going forward. Clambering for witnesses' photos at the scene immediately is rushing to headlines over family being told respectful and in the public interest." I don't know. What do you think?
It is always I think an element of journalism that the public probably don't like very much is the scramble to confirm. We should probably establish that this is definitely a news story.
Yeah, it's in the public interest. A sitting MP has died, of course. That is going to have to be reported. Parliament is the public's voice. It's where we make our laws. An MP dying is in the public interest. It's a news story for sure. The question is whether it's in the news, the public interest for them to know at 11:02 a.m. as opposed to 11:05 when the family, and you know that the family has been notified. And I don't think that necessarily is in the public interest. And if there was a way to make sure that actually the family has been notified before we go out with this kind of thing, it would be a good thing, in my opinion, especially when it's something like this, where it's just someone's untimely death. It's not a murder. It's not a danger for the public. There's not a disaster happening like an earthquake or a volcano. That would be good. I just don't see whether it would be practically possible more than whether it's ethically desirable.
And I think maybe one of the elements that people do find distasteful is the rush to be the first to confirm a news story, which I do understand. And
there's something a bit distasteful about that rush. And we're in journalism, when you're in the industry, there's a bunch of stuff that you kind of have to do, and it's sold to you as just part of the public interest function of the profession. Yeah. What's called in the industry, probably quite distasteful, the name death knocks.
Death knocks, yeah,
is one of those things where you knock on the door of a grieving family, and your editors will tell you that's because we're here about. And you might not like it, but we're here to tell stories. I feel that there's more of an economic justification for those things than an ethical one, to be honest. In this case, though, it's a public interest story, and unless there is agreement from all of the media organisations in New Zealand, I don't know how you're going to necessarily institute rules that will make sure that the family aren't going to be informed through a news notification. Because if, for instance, Just Stuff doesn't want to rush into these kinds of breaking news situations, then one of their competitors certainly will. How are you even going to organise it?
It harks back, doesn't it, almost to the days where maybe there were two papers in town, and if your competitor had a story and you didn't have that story, then they would sell out and your paper wouldn't. And so there is an economic imperative to be first. Whereas in the age of push notifications and digital news, you can match a story very, very quickly and put out your own. It's
far lessened, but I think there is still that economic imperative in their mind, in that they want to be at the top of the Google search results, and they want to be first. And maybe it is just a hangover of those days in some ways, but there is some economic imperative there. It's whether. It just adds an extra complication, right? There's breaking news, we're going to cover it. That's a very easy process and a very easy decision to make. There's breaking news, we need to go through these protocols before we can decide whether to cover it. That's a very difficult thing, and it's already a stressful situation. I don't know whether it's practically feasible.
And this is a very unusual case as well, in that it happened in public. Generally, particularly with a death, the police might serve as the police might not confirm someone's death until they had notified the family.
Yeah, exactly.
Circumstances, right? So
these sorts of situations are probably not that common. But yeah, it is really unfortunate. And as someone that has a family, that the idea of them getting a notification or finding out about the death of my loved one through the media, like, it would be horrifying. So yes, it would be really good if we could avoid that and if we could put processes in place. But I think it would require agreement between various news organisations.
Let's talk about polls. You were going to start by talking about the coverage of polls before today's tragic news. What did you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, the fate of ACT and multiple polls. So we started out with the Courier Taxpayers Union poll on February 10, which showed ACT on 13.7%. And of course, that was straight after quite a divisive Waitangi Day weekend. A lot of the focus was on ACT's efforts to put forward a treaty principles bill, and several commentators made the link between that contentious debate and ACT's result. The Herald in particular, its reporter Thomas Coughlin, he tweeted, "ACT is the big winner in the most recent Taxpayer Union Courier poll. The focus on the Treaty Principles Bill looks like it's helping the party," and that was echoed in the paper itself. Its report said the ACT Party and its leader David Seymour appeared to have reaped the dividends of a heated Waitangi Day period, rocketing up to 13.7%. Stuff to their credit, actually didn't do this. And they just reported the results straight. They didn't say this is why the results are the way they are. Now, some left-leaning people on social media were offended that this poll was being reported in this way because it's a taxpayer union courier poll. And if you don't know those organisations, the taxpayer union, of course, is the taxpayers union. It is quite right-leaning. Courier is founded by David Farrar, National Party pollster. But it was actually a relatively reliable poll in the lead up to last year's general election.
It tends to be one of the two most reliable polling.
Signs up to the New Zealand polling code, that kind of thing. I think the real issue for me was making any kind of judgment about the voters' true beliefs and exactly what's informing their decisions based on the results of one poll, especially without any data confirming that that was what was motivating them.
And there have been several polls since then that have painted a very different picture, Hayden.
Exactly. So first we had a leaked poll by Labour's preferred polling agency, Talbot Mills. It showed ACT on 7%, pretty dire. Then last night we had One News, and it put out its first One News variant poll of the year. It had ACT at its lowest result in 2 years at 8%, and that prompted Deputy Political Editor Mikey Sherman to make this assessment.
The treaty debate doing no favours for ACT. It continues to slide down 1 point to 8%. This is the worst result for ACT in almost 2 years.
Oh.
Yeah, two conflicting messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, or directly contradictory messages there. Treaty debate doing no favours, or treaty debate elevating ACT to 13.7%.
I mean, we do look for order and chaos, don't we, and explanations and things like that, though.
Yeah, it's the human brain. I know that you do a little bit of sort of pseudo-psychology on this program, don't you, Emile? But we are meaning-making machines. We like to craft narratives out of stuff, and we have a recency bias. We have a whole host of cognitive biases at play. But I am struck by the way our interpretation of these polls, and it's not just this poll, but every poll, it almost seems about as methodologically robust as spreading some chicken entrails on the table, lighting some sage, consulting the spirit realm. Like, how do we know that the voters necessarily were motivated by ACT's stance on the treaty principles bill to reject them or to elevate them to 13.7%? We don't really have any data to suggest that. It's just what was happening lately. And actually, the voters are kind of weird. Anyone who's actually met one will know that, because they'll have a whole host of idiosyncratic views on a whole bunch of stuff, and they'll be motivated because the price of sheep in Balclutha or something, you know? It's not necessarily, they're not as plugged into politics of the day. So I just think there's probably a case for a degree of caution here, drawing messages out of one poll.
So you say
statistically iffy in the first place. We should be looking at the long-term average of polls rather than an individual one. But also to say exactly what the voters are thinking, we don't.
So, right. So it's sort of, your objection is making sweeping inferences off the basis of one poll or imperfect information that is asking questions where, you know, the reasonable expectation of...
We say things like New Zealanders are feeling this way, or the base national voter is feeling this way. And if we're saying that, we should have some data underpinning it. We should have something underpinning it rather than just a vibe. Because what are we? We're reporters. We're meant to report on facts. But this is just... It just feels like we are consulting the spirit realm or inherited knowledge of politics to report on what New Zealanders are thinking if we don't have data underpinning that. By the way, that's not just polls. We should not jump the gun on stuff like reporting election results as well. I saw that Geordie Rogers won the...
Interesting one, that one, yeah.
Lambton, the Pukahino Lambton by-election today, and we had reports a week or so ago saying Ice Cream Man, this is the headline from Stuff, Ice Cream Guy wins Wellington Council by-election. Right. Well, he hadn't and he didn't. Maybe we shouldn't jump the gun on that stuff either.
I mean, do you think that we are focusing a bit much on the polls at this stage of the electoral cycle?
I mean, Colin, I won't repeat what he actually commented on my script, but it had, I swear, it was something, it had the word yes in it.
And the naughty word.
And possibly something in front of that word as well.
Right.
He obviously believes so. I think we are, because it's meaningless, right? Everything is going to change in 3 years.
Is it meaningless? Polls are valuable as part of a trend,
Yes.
right? Like, and so I guess maybe no individual poll is in and of itself meaningful, but you have to continually be doing polls in order for the trend to be valuable, don't you?
Yeah, you're right there, actually. That makes a decent statistical case that we need to have that. Is it going to be valuable over that kind of period, a 3-year period? Maybe.
Because we whinge about how we don't have enough polling in New Zealand
Yeah.
for it to be reliable and the polls always being off. Well, we got to have polls in order for the polls.
And this one is interesting as well, because you're measuring whether they've got the post-election bounce, which is a thing that most governments get. In this case, they didn't. So that's interesting to know that they didn't. I think you're right. I quite like them. They're at least interesting.
They're
interesting.
Yeah.
It's something to talk about, but the something to talk about factor is kind of problematic in a way, because we do that stuff. We do that meaning making. We start creating a narrative of this couple of very isolated. We haven't got the trend. We've just got 1 or 2 polls. And we're going, should Chris Hipkins resign? Is the treaty principles bill, is it working? There's not enough data to really do that. And they start to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. A narrative gets crafted off them. That becomes the political media's narrative. That narrative then becomes a reality because it's being reported by the political media, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the issue that I see with them.
Maybe, Hayden, maybe it's to do with sort of the way that poll data is presented, which often seems to be with a lot of fanfare. Oh my God, this poll is unbelievable. Buy some plane tickets for your family and children because New Zealand might spontaneously implode with these numbers.
And that's because they've paid
a lot of money.
Through the eyeballs? Through the nose.
Through the nose,
not the eyeballs.
I don't think so. Through some kind of orifice.
What do you do when you pay through the... Well, I mean, yes, stylistically, and that's the news. I actually kind of like that style from News Hub. Again, I'm probably diverging from Colin here, but I quite like this poll will melt your face off. Do not wear your sunscreen before taking in the results of this poll because it's like the rays of the sun.
Yeah.
That's an interesting stylistic point that you make as well, because we had Mikey Sherman, the deputy political editor for One News, presenting the One News poll for the first time, I think, last night. And she was a bit more razzmatazz than Jessica Mutch Mackay. So here she is talking about the preferred Prime Minister numbers.
Now, here's the real clincher. Preferred Prime Minister, check this out. Christopher Luxon is steady at 25%, but ding, 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 ring the alarm bells. Chris Hipkins has nosedived, his popularity plummeting a whopping 10 points on 15%. He's standing on shaky ground.
Oh, there is a bit of razzmatazz to that.
Yeah, a little bit more razzmatazz than Jessica Mutch Mackay, maybe distinguishing herself in a little way. I think there could be a little bit more distinguishing, though, because this was a very competent effort, but it was quite formulaic. It stuck to the existing One News variant formula. One thing that I do wonder, and look, there's probably a whole host of reasons why this is infeasible and I'm stupid and I don't know broadcasting, but for me, what's actually more interesting with these polls often is the results that you get the next day, which are surveying the public on what they think about various issues, whether they like a capital gains tax or the treaty principles bill, or whether they want a referendum on the treaty. I'd love to see those kind of incorporated into the main poll results, to add a bit of colour and shade to them, to explain, to do what I was talking about before, and actually add a bit of data to some of the things that we're positing about the poll results, to say, well, actually, voters do care about this. This may be influencing their decision. Who knows? Maybe Mikey will do that if she gets the job.
The other big political, their job being the TVNZ political editor role, which Jessica Mutch Mackay is vacating. You might have said that already. I just thought I'd clarify that. But there's another big political story this week, the benefit system reset, and you wanted to highlight an aspect of the commentary that caught your attention, Hayden. Yeah,
this is just a little bit of a bugbear of mine, something that I noticed. And that is people saying, and some of the commentary, so Claire Trevette, I'll say, one of my favourite political journalists, writing insightful, often funny, she's sourced up, she's trustworthy. Most importantly of all, she agreed to do an interview with me for my show Get It To Te Papa about the Waitangi dildo and the need to get that into Te Papa. So she's great, but her analysis on National's benefit announcement made heavy use of that old phrase, it may not be good policy, but it's good politics, variations on that. She called Louise Upston's letter to the Ministry of Social Development largely theatre, but she said it was good politics. The policy itself may not be well thought out, she thought, but it plays well with National's base. And she wasn't alone in that, so some of the same points were made by RNZ political editor Joe Moyer on Morning Report.
I think Christopher Luxon's taken an opportunity here, alongside his National Party Minister Louise Upston, to really have the oxygen on this one. You have seen both Winston Peters and David Seymour being sucking up so much of that government oxygen of late over the last few months, in the first sort of, 80-odd days of the 100-day plan. This was a really easy, I guess, opportunity for National to put some runs on the board, really.
Right. So I guess, the argument against that is that, the political press is there not just to report verbatim what's said, but to explain the politics of, why politicians are acting the way that they are, and what they are maybe thinking behind the scenes. It's not justifiable?
Kind of float above it in a way. I think there's kind of an element of truth to that. I just do get a little bit worried about it. For one thing, when you say something, when you say something is good politics, it's often just inherited wisdom, or it's anecdata, basically. It's I talked to a couple of people down at a field days and they said this. It's not scientific, per se. But I think sometimes it also ignores the media's role in shaping what makes for good politics. We have a powerful influence here. Maybe if we focused on describing and explaining policies rather than philosophizing on their potential political popularity, some things that are now good politics wouldn't be good politics.
Well, it's a little bit snake eating its tail in a way, isn't it? In that what you might describe as, in inverted media terms, good politics, that sort of shorthand for stuff that your voting base will like and will make them more likely to continue voting for you in the future, i.e. stuff that is likely to get you re-elected. And in order to put policies in place, you need to get elected first, right?
Yeah, and I often feel a little bit sort of naive and silly saying this, but for me, it's not. It feels like the wrong focus. It's what Jay Rosen, a US media commentator, calls the savvy style, where journalists kind of float above a policy and just, they don't deliver any judgment on whether it's good or bad or right or wrong. They just say, oh, well, it's good at winning over this particular electorate or this voting base. And really what our job should be, in terms of what is saying, this is what the policy is going to do. This is where its flaws are. This is where its good parts are, this is where its benefits are, and that's our job as journalists, right? Rather than kind of having a little bit of a like positing what the potential electoral impact of it could be.
But that comes with its own jeopardy, right? Then you're making value judgments about what are good and flawed parts
and
of
this is where this interaction of this view of neutrality comes with because people think that neutrality is never making a judgment or never saying something is right or wrong. No, it's just not being a stooge. It's not just going into bat for your own team. It's being willing to criticize everything and hold everything's feet to the fire. And I think it kind of also cuts off avenues of investigation sometimes, because in this case it wasn't really that good politics in some ways. We had Christopher Luxon on the back foot when it turned out he was saying that cancer patients need to work. And if we're just saying it's good politics, maybe we won't ask that question necessarily. Obviously, the media did. Not everyone thought it was just good politics. But that's my other issue with it. I know we're running out of time.
We are. Should we go? Let's go Woolworths, eh?
Oh, should we? Woolworths?
Yeah,
okay.
Let's go to Woolworths. We've got 2 minutes left.
I'll say, look, Four Corners, an ABC investigative unit over there, they did an investigation that might sound familiar to people. Apparently there's a supermarket duopoly over there exercising too much market power, and it might be driving some suppliers out of business. And look, do we have time for the clip?
Do. Yeah, let's
This is Woolworths chief Brad Banducci talking to Angus Grigg.
He retired 18 months ago. He's not...
Okay, can we take that out? Is that okay? He is retired, but I shouldn't have said that. Angus? Are we going to leave it in there if we are?
Well, I mean, we're on the record. You said it. I mean, let's move on. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm done, guys. I do this with good intent. I don't do this with bad intent.
You're walking out, really?
No. Can we just talk through Brad for a sec?
That was Brad Banducci attempting to walk out of an interview after getting some tough questions about competition. And now, look, he resigned today. And Woolworths is at pains to say it was a pre-planned thing. Totally not
nothing
related.
to do with this.
Nothing to do with it at all. He's just retiring, guys. It's nothing to do with him getting into an absolute spot of bother on the TV the other night. So I hope that my audience is reassured by that and takes that in.
Interesting that he fronted for an interview with Four Corners, though. You don't get that often.
And that's the other thing. Dita DeBoni from the NBR mentioned this, but we don't see supermarket bosses fronting over here too much, do we? Actually, Brad Banducci might actually be technically our big supermarket boss as the chief executive of Woolworths, owner of Countdown.
We can't interview him now.
But he hasn't talked about New Zealand prices. He's only talked about Australian ones.
Thank you, Hayden.
Thank you very much.
It's Hayden Donnell.